Imagine this. You wake up on a Tuesday morning, no alarm, no commute, no boss. And while you were sleeping, dividends landed in your account. Not a huge amount, but enough. Enough to cover the groceries, the electricity bill, the rates. Enough that you do not have to work unless you want to. That is what living off dividends actually looks like. Not yachts, not private jets, just income that shows up whether you work or not. So how much do you actually need invested in Australia to pull that off? Because the number most people guess is either way too high or completely disconnected from how dividends actually work here. And Australia, as it turns out, has one of the most dividend-friendly systems in the world. Once you understand why, the target starts to make a lot more sense. Let's start with the basics. When you own shares in a company, you own a small piece of that business. Some companies take their profits and reinvest everything back into growth. Others take a portion of those profits and pay them out to shareholders. That payment is a dividend. In Australia, many of the biggest companies on the ASK pay dividends regularly. Banks, supermarkets, infrastructure businesses, miners. These are not speculative startups. These are companies with decades of earnings behind them. But here is the part that makes Australia genuinely different. Franking credits. When an Australian company pays tax on its profits and then pays you a dividend, it can attach a franking credit to that dividend. That credit represents the tax the company already paid. And when you lodge your tax return, that credit reduces your personal tax bill. If your tax rate is low enough, you can actually get a refund. That means the effective yield on Australian shares, once you include franking, is often higher than the headline number suggests. A share paying a 4% dividend yield with full franking at a 30% corporate tax rate has a grossed-up yield of about 5.7%. That gap matters a lot when you are building an income portfolio. So, how much do you need? Let's work through some real scenarios. If you want $40,000 a year in dividend income and you are targeting a portfolio yielding 4% in cash dividends with full franking, you need roughly $1 million invested. Add franking credits and the grossed-up value of that income may be closer to $57,000 before personal tax. For someone with no other income, a lot of that could come back to you at tax time. If you want $60,000 a year, the same portfolio structure puts your target at around $1,500,000. If $80,000 a year is the goal, you are looking at roughly $2 million. Those numbers sound large. But before you close the tab, let's put them in context. First, these scenarios assume a relatively conservative yield of around 4%. The average grossed-up yield on the ASX 200, including franking, has historically sat somewhere between 5% and 6%. So, depending on what you hold and when you measure it, the real income from a well-constructed Australian dividend portfolio can be meaningfully higher than a simple 4% calculation suggests. Second, most Australians are not building this portfolio from scratch outside of super. Super changes the maths significantly. If your super balance is generating dividend income inside a retirement pension account, earnings are generally tax-free in that environment. Franking credits can still work in your favour. And the minimum drawdown rules mean the government does expect you to actually use the money, but a dividend-focused strategy inside super can produce reliable income without touching your capital, depending on the balance and the yield. Now here is the part most people miss. Living off dividends does not have to mean living off dividends alone. The age pension still exists. If your invested assets fall under the thresholds, you may still qualify for some pension support. And if you own your home, your housing cost is controlled. That combination changes the target number dramatically. A couple who owns their home has $800,000 in a dividend-producing portfolio. and qualifies for even a part pension is in a very different position to a renter with the same portfolio trying to also cover rent in a capital city. The honest answer is that the number you need depends on the life you are funding. Let's look at 3 versions. A lean dividend lifestyle, covering essential costs only, no travel, basic health cover, modest spending, around $35,000 to $40,000 a year. At a 4.5% grossed up yield, you might get there with somewhere around $800,000 to $900,000 in assets, especially if you also own your home and potentially receive some pension support. A comfortable dividend lifestyle, private health, a decent car, meals out, a domestic holiday once or twice a year. Closer to $55,000 to $65,000 a year. That likely requires somewhere between $1,200,000 and $5,500,000 in dividend-producing assets, depending on yields and tax. A generous dividend lifestyle, regular overseas travel, financial flexibility, helping family, replacing things without stress. You are probably looking at $80,000 or more a year in income. That puts the portfolio target above $1,100,000 to $2 million at conservative yields. None of these numbers are magic. They shift depending on interest rates, dividend payout decisions by companies, your personal tax situation, whether your super is in accumulation or pension phase, and how much of your spending is fixed versus flexible. But here is something worth thinking about. Most people who build dividend income do not do it all at once. They build it slowly. They start with $10,000 in an ETF tracking the AS 200, then $20,000, then $50,000. Each year dividends come in. They reinvest those dividends. The portfolio grows. The income grows. Over 20 or 30 years, what started as a modest investment can become a meaningful income stream. This is not a get-rich-quick strategy. It is a get-comfortable slowly strategy. And for most Australians, that is exactly what works. There are also risks worth naming. Companies can cut dividends. During COVID, many Australian companies reduced or suspended their dividends entirely. If you are relying on dividend income, a broad-based cut during a crisis means your income drops, sometimes sharply, right when everything else feels uncertain too. That is why diversification matters. Holding 10 shares in 10 banks is not diversification. Holding a broad ETF or a mix of sectors, including industrials, infrastructure, healthcare, and consumer staples, spreads that risk across hundreds of businesses. Inflation is another quiet threat. If your dividend income stays flat, but the cost of everything keeps rising, your real purchasing power shrinks. Some companies grow their dividends over time, which helps. Others do not. Planning for inflation means either holding companies with pricing power, building in a buffer, or having a plan for gradually drawing down some capital alongside dividends. And then there is concentration risk. Australia's dividend market is heavily weighted toward banks and miners. Those two sectors dominate the AS. If you hold only Australian shares for yield, your income depends a lot on what happens to Australian banks and iron ore prices. Adding some international exposure, even if it comes with lower dividend yields, can reduce that dependency. So, what is the practical takeaway? To live off dividends in Australia, a rough target range for most people is between $800,000 and $2,000. 0,000 in invested assets, depending on your lifestyle. Whether you own your home, your access to the age pension, your tax situation, and the yield of your portfolio. At the lower end, you are living lean but free. At the higher end, you are living comfortably with genuine financial flexibility. The good news is that Australia's franking credit system makes dividend investing genuinely powerful here compared to most countries. The bad news is that there is no single number that works for everyone. The better question is not how much do I need to live off dividends. The better question is, what life am I building? And what income does that life actually require? Start there. Then work backwards to the portfolio. Subscribe for more practical Australian money breakdowns. And comment below with the income you would need to feel financially free, because I think the answers are going to be very different.